Hello, and welcome to another Old Scams in Shiny New Packages podcast. On these podcasts, we use 20th century experience and ideas to better understand 21st century scams, risks, and potential approaches. My name is John P. Rayberger, and I'm here with my podcasting collaborator, Don Wood. Hello, Don.
Hello, John, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is going to be about online dating and romance and scams, and I think online dating now is something almost everybody can somehow relate to. So this should be interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing your insights.
Well, thank you. I'd like to sort of talk about this from two perspectives. One is the traditional scam where somebody tries to get somebody romantically involved online or in person and tries to get money out of them. And two, I'd like to talk about all the problems associated with online dating and where we think that's going to go. That's not quite as scammy, but if it ever happens to you, like catfishing or anything like that, it sure feels pretty scammy.
Mm-hmm.
So the first problem I'd like to talk about is where a scammer tries to romance typically an older woman and tries to essentially get money out of them by expressing interest and showing how much that person likes and maybe even loves them and things like that. The FBI collects data on this, and the average person to whom this occurs, and it is most likely an older woman, loses approximately $9,000. So it's not a trivial thing. And this has been going on a long time in the used to be called the analog world and the pre-digital world. And a matter of fact, I have personally seen this happen. I had a next door neighbor, and she was an older woman, and she was affluent, and she had a mentally disabled husband, and she was kind of lonely, and a much younger man befriended her. And we thought it was kind of weird when this much younger man nobody recognized before started coming around. And he had a plan, and he befriended her, and she felt sorry for him, and he told a sob story, and eventually she loaned him $10,000 or $12,000, something in that range. And after a while, after she heard all these excuses about why he couldn't pay it back, she finally caught on. And she finally caught on and said, "Oh, this guy's never going to pay me back. I'm going to take him to court." And she mentioned that to me. And to be honest with you, I laughed about it because I said, there's no way this guy's going to stay around long enough for anybody to take him to court under any circumstances. He'll be gone as soon as anybody finds out about this. And she was kind of personally upset after a while that she'd been scammed by the whole thing, and she considered herself too smart, but she had a good heart and she wanted to help people. And so, like I said, I didn't think this kind of thing occurred, but I saw it in person. This is the same type of thing that occurs online, and there's plenty of evidence to support this. It's kind of sad when people go on dating sites and get scammed like this, but it does happen, and people just need to be aware of that.
The world is full of gold diggers and ne'er-do-wells. Always has been, always will be. It just happens that this is the shiny new package. Now the gold digger or the ne'er-do-well has a nice photograph or a pleasing personality at first, and it's easy to get sucked in. You mentioned that this acquaintance of yours who fell into this terrible dilemma was embarrassed and considered herself too smart to fall for something like this.
Yes. I actually saw her go through the whole reconciliation process in her mind where she realized that this was not a nice guy who she was helping out and that this really was just a scammer who was just trying to steal money from her.
And so her pride must have been hurt on this. And this is something that you mentioned in an earlier podcast, which I think is really key, which is when stuff like this happens, the first person we should forgive is ourselves for falling into something like this because it happens. Not to be embarrassed. Yes, it's depressing. It's irritating, it's infuriating, and it costs money. But these types of things happen all the time, whether it's online or not. It's just part of the human condition.
I think that's a great insight. I think forgiving oneself is excellent advice. As it turns out, this acquaintance eventually became afraid of this guy to the point where she came to my house one time and asked me that if she ran into trouble, whether she could come over to my house and hide.
Oh boy.
So her pride was hurt, and she also finally
Yep.
felt a little threatened by this guy.
Mhm.
Now, I think he finally caught on that he wasn't going to get more money out of her, and he just disappeared. So I think he wasn't dumb enough to do anything violent or abusive, but she was also scared. Her pride was hurt, and she was also scared for a while.
So is there something in your mind that's qualitatively different about online dating and romance that makes this an even more pernicious threat than it used to be in the past?
I think the internet allows a longer reach. I think somebody from Russia or India can now do it just as easily as somebody. But I'd also like to say, I think it's actually easier if people pull off these kind of things in person because they can present themselves a certain way in person that is really hard to simulate online. So, yeah, you can reach further people further away, but in some ways, I think it's when I saw this in person, I was more convinced by this guy in person than I would have been had I seen his photo on an online dating site somewhere. Does that make sense? I mean,
It does.
he was really convincing. He really was really convincing. I think now that I think about it, he had probably done this before with multiple women, to be honest
Mhm.
with you.
Mhm. And you can't phony up your personal appearance in real life the way that
Yeah, it's
evidence
much.
shows people do online.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he was a good-looking guy too. He was probably half her age. She was in her mid to upper 60s, and he was probably in his 30s. And he was a really good-looking guy, and he had a nice car, and he was convincing. I mean, I felt sorry for her. I was more suspicious. Other neighbors that we had were suspicious. It's sad, but it's also enlightening all at
Mhm.
once.
Mhm.
And I guess that's one kind of obvious scam. The other type of, I'm not sure to call it a scam, but when you're in the middle of it, it's a scam, is the typical process people go through when they're online dating. And I unfortunately was divorced a while ago, and I was busy, and I was in a situation where I did not want to date at work because that might have been misconstrued as sexual harassment. So I went into the online dating world, and it's a jungle out there, is all I can say.
Mhm.
I was catfished once where I had a lengthy conversation over weeks with somebody who I assumed was a woman who was interested in me. And I went to a restaurant, it's a well known restaurant, and I sat there for hours and I finally realized that she or he or whatever it was stood me up.
Oh,
And that's not a traditional scam, but it's when you're in the middle of it and you put the effort into it and you thought you had a rapport with this person and you
oh
go
yeah.
through all the effort and you sit there and people kind of come in and look at you and wonder. And our neighbor came in and looked at me and like
Oops.
wondered, what the heck are you doing here? And I'm like, I don't know. This is kind of awkward.
Oh
And
yes.
it feels very scammy when you're in the middle of it.
Mhm.
And I suspect that with AI tools being more and more readily available to fake one's appearance and everything about one's various attributes and limitations, I think this is only going to get worse over time. And we've talked about this in offline before this, but online dating is the singular most popular way to meet somebody in
Yes.
America today.
Yeah. I think it's the default. It's the default option. It's what people assume that is the first try, is what's out there online. And there's probably a lot of sociological reasons for that. It does have it does have the appearance of something that's efficient because you can filter and so on and get the exact person you want. But I don't know about you, but I think we just get the feeling from people who've been through this that it really isn't very efficient. There's so much you have to choose from, as you say, all the way to Russia. There are people out there that you have access to. But one of the things that you mentioned was the scammy part. And is that when you had this experience, were there any tip-offs for you that this might not be real, or was it so well done that you with such a critical mind was sucked into this unknowingly?
I was sucked into it unknowingly. I thought this was a real person. Matter of fact, I used to ride the bus to and from work, and I thought that this is a person that I might have seen on the bus I went into one time. So obviously, I was fooling myself, or she got cold feet, or she was not what she appeared to be and then backed out, or something was going on. I don't know what's going on.
Did she ever come back to you, or it, or whatever, or did you just not hear
No,
from?
no, I think she dropped her account, if I remember right. So
It
that
could have
made
been something like cold feet, something
it,
innocent like cold feet.
it could have been, but then she or he or whatever should have apologized later on and said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm really not interested." I mean, I thought that would have been the polite thing to do. Matter of fact, if I remember right, now this was a while ago. If I remember right, I even wrote her back and say, "Where were you? I was at the restaurant. Where were you?" And if she had a good excuse, then she makes the good excuse and I'll follow up. But she didn't have a good excuse. There was nothing. So I think the whole thing was just fake from the beginning. And I want to also say this whole thing is not nothing new. I met my first wife before the internet was popular, and I met her in person. And if you went into bars and restaurants and sporting events back then, I mean, there are all kinds of scammy stuff that went on back then too.
Oh yeah.
I remember back then, women could far more easily, for example, lie about their age. Matter of fact, I had female friends who like turned it into an art form. It's, well, I'm 35, but all my friends say I look like I'm 31, so I'm going to tell everybody I'm 31.
Yes.
And then guys would also lie about stuff like how much money they made, or how where they'd traveled to, or all the adventures they'd have in life. And that was sometimes just guys just BS about all kinds of stuff like that. So these type of things are not new. People have been doing it for a long time. It's just again the reach is further, and I think AI is going to make it even worse. To be honest with you.
Hmm. Yeah, it just seems to me that one of the things that works sometimes in politics, and maybe it should work in the field of romance, is to lower expectations. So instead of saying that you're 35, but my friends think I'm 31, you could say, well, I'm 35, but my friends actually think I'm 40. And so, but then by the time you meet, actually you do look 35. And those expectations have been exceeded almost by definition from the very beginning. But people don't play that game. They do a kind of a bait and switch that actually just turns out to be a huge disappointment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, but I think people embellish things for good reason. And there's a dating site called Plenty of Fish that gathers a lot of analytical data about this, like who are the women that are most likely to get messaged and who are the men that are most likely to get messaged. And the attractive young women get messaged at a far higher rate than those considered to be sort of medium attractiveness. In other words, it becomes more like your choice of suitors if you're considered really attractive, and almost all the guys, if you're a very attractive woman, will try to send you a message and try to have some kind of dialogue with you on dating sites. Same thing with men who have unusually high incomes or are taller than 6 feet. And that's why men are more likely to lie about their height, typically by about 2 inches, and women typically lie about their age online, statistically speaking, as being approximately 3 years younger than they really are.
So,
And
so
plenty.
you've got the picture of two people coming into a restaurant, both of whom have these pictures in their heads of stars and studs, and within 10 seconds, they're instantly disappointed. That doesn't seem like a good way to start a date.
Well, actually, it's kind of funny because that's another experience I had is I met another woman online, and when I met her at a restaurant, I didn't recognize her because her online pictures were at least 10 years old.
Oh my gosh.
At least 10 years, maybe not that bad, but 5 to 10 years older
Oh,
than
that's
she
terrible.
really was.
Yeah.
And they had all the fuzzy lighting and still, but still, I almost didn't recognize her. So you're right. It makes it feel kind of awkward. And then the other problem is you don't know what else they're trying to deceive you about, also. If they're willing to deceive you as something as obvious as their appearance, then what else are they trying to deceive you about? And that's why the whole thing feels kind of scammy when you're in the middle of it. Because instead of relaxing and having a good time, you constantly have to have your antenna up as to what am I missing? What is this? Is this person trying to sell me on joining Amway or something like that?
Yes, yes. The human mind is very quick. And if you were to meet a person in real life, we do every day, you meet someone, it doesn't take long for, I guess you call it intuition, or nowadays the kind of vernacular is a spidey sense. You can get a pretty good idea of what that person's like within 5 or 10 minutes, based on cues like clothes, hair, expression, vocabulary. These are things that, the way they walk, perhaps an opinion that's spontaneous. These are things that you cannot capture online. You can only
Yeah,
capture that in real life.
I
And
agree.
that's what we're evolved to do, by the way. We were evolved for in real life interaction.
Yeah, and that's why one of the dating sites research books out there doesn't call them dating sites, it calls them introduction sites. In other words, you're not really dating this person, you're simply introduced to a person. And this person's book also suggests that anybody you meet online on a dating site, you should try to meet them as soon as possible. In other words, you shouldn't spend months dialoguing with them online. You should try to meet them as soon as possible. And this person's advice seems to correlate with your observation too, that you just get a more better sense of the person by meeting them in person.
Remember the speed dating phenomenon? Do they still have that?
I don't know. Good question. I don't know whether there's speed dating out there. I mean, to be honest with you, online dating nowadays sometimes almost feels like speed dating. I mean, especially for the younger generation. This podcast is oriented towards sort of people who've been around a while. But I think the younger generation, the way they swipe right through Tinder profiles, I think it kind of sort of feels almost like speed dating. I'm sure there are some speed dating places out there, but it's probably been replaced by the online equivalent of it.
I was in an airplane traveling back from Boston, and a woman sat next to me, and we were in coach. So, of course, we got to know each other quickly, even though we didn't say a word to each other. But, I could see all of her purse contents and paraphernalia because she was packing and unpacking. As soon as she sat down and strapped herself in, she grabbed her phone, she went to a dating site, and she started flipping through the pictures, until the flight attendant told her to put the phone away. We're about to take off. So here she was, surrounded in an airport by plenty of eligible men, sitting next to someone on an airplane that's a guy. But the first order of business was to go into the cyber world where she's not sure if these people actually exist or not and evaluate each and every picture. So that's what we've
I
gotten
know.
into.
Especially if you're a coach, it's like hard not to notice the
That's
person
right.
next to you. I
I mean,
mean,
a nice hello would have been nice, and we could have made eye contact. And I said, "Oh, how are you?" But that just doesn't happen now. It's right to the phone.
that's kind of funny. I know that's kind of funny. But I think now my theory, and this is kind of out there, is that I think AI is going to delegitimize dating sites. And there's evidence of that already on Pinterest. I don't know if you're familiar with Pinterest, but Pinterest is a site where people put up home decor, beautiful gardening pictures, beautiful decorations for their domestic space, like around their kitchen and things like that. From what I've read, and I'm not a Pinterest user, but from multiple sources, that has now been dominated by AI.
Oh boy.
In other words, it's not things that actually people have done in terms of home decor. It's AI created slop where people have created some kind of request for a beautiful garden and they sort of pass it off as their own, even though it's just AI slop.
Oh, good.
And so to me, I think instead of being a site where people actually do their own self-expression via their home decor, it'll be a how good are you at creating AI pictures? I think Pinterest will eventually go away because creating AI pictures is a lot easier than, creating a beautiful flower setting or a
Sure.
beautiful table setting. And I can visualize the same thing happening to dating sites where there's no ability to filter the AI slop out of dating sites and everybody will look perfect. And so everything will look perfect and be perfect, even though everybody knows it's not perfect and even though they know they're not perfect on it. So I think these dating sites might be a little worried about AI when everybody's looking perfect, even though that's not representing reality.
I agree. I think that that phrase AI slop, which is new, that will adhere to a lot of different things in the world. It'll be AI slopified somehow, and we'll be looking for something more genuine than that. But I think that the concept of AI, artificial intelligence, and kind of just making things look better is kind of interesting because there's a book out now by Cory Doctorow called, well, it's got a bad word in it, SH something T, ified, and thatified. But basically, what his argument is that I think is that everything's just becoming degraded and worse, and AI is just going to be part of that. It's going to make things worse. And so your thesis is that that's really going to hurt Pinterest and maybe other sites, including dating sites, where we won't know what to trust.
Yeah,
Everything will look too good.
well, it already has impacted Pinterest. Well, my theory is people feel a whole lot less guilty about AI generating a table setting than they do about essentially creating a comic book version of themselves. But eventually it's going to happen because if there is a correlation between physical appearance and the number of messages you get on these dating sites, people already enhanced their appearance to some degree and people already have. And that's why it's kind of a gray area. And that's why it's a little scammy, but it's also a little natural. It's one of these gray areas of life where people have used for years different clothing and makeup and lighting and things like that to make themselves look good, which is almost like within cultural expectations. But AI takes it to a whole new level where you can essentially create a fake version of yourself and it's photorealistic. And Adobe Photoshop used to be the kind of technique to tweak your appearance a little bit, and then people would try to figure out whether that was used or not. But the AI pictures that could be created are literally photorealistic. They're not you, but they're photorealistic, and you can't use the same techniques you did in Photoshop to try to detect whether it's fake or not.
We're in a world of hurt. We truly are with this stuff coming on.
Well, I mean, to me, it's going to have some kind of effect. I just don't know what the effect is going to be. And I heard somebody say, well, won't there be a demand for a site that is 100% authentic? And the problem there is how are you going to filter and know whether something's 100% authentic or not?
Yeah,
My
you just won't be able to.
Right. And so what ironically, we may be going back to the whole bar scene, restaurant scene where you actually meet people in person again because then you have the ability to see them up close and personal and evaluate them like you previously stated.
Yeah, where you can gather real information in real time and exercise your ability to be charming in real time without notes or something that's canned. I mean, that it requires a kind of a performance, but it's very natural.
Right.
And so I think that may be happening. But for the folks listening to this podcast, romance never dies. It's just part of our life as human beings. Would you say that one should just abandon the online dating scene for all the reasons that you mentioned? If you've got your mobility, if you've got the ability to drive, if you have interesting things to do and you want to get out, why not just give up on that online stuff? Move totally back to the future. 1975. Pretend it's 1975.
And meet people in person. To me, online dating is one tool. It's a tool for accomplishing maybe something that you want. Going and meeting people in person, maybe a different tool or a different venue. I think the big attraction of online is you can, first of all, you can know that they're more likely to be single because online they're essentially telling the world that they're single. And despite my problems, I had good experiences on balance. For example, I met my wife online. Now, that was a while ago, essentially before you see a lot of the AI slop. But I don't think it's an either or proposition. I think you should consider all venues, and they all kind of have their pros and cons. I mean, the big attraction of online is you can meet people outside your direct community, outside the places you normally meet. And so it casts a bigger net. Be maybe more careful about it. And it kind of has the detachment associated with, particularly for women, I think it's viewed as less threatening. Whereas sometimes if they go into a bar or restaurant to meet somebody, sometimes guys can come off kind of creepy and they feel threatened. And I think women have a higher sensitivity to feeling threatened about things like that. And I think for a lot of women, they feel less threatened online. So to me, it's just a different venue, and it's various pros and cons.
Of course, now you can find out a lot of things about a person. I mean, it used to be that you might be in the telephone book, maybe.
Yeah.
We don't have telephone books anymore, but we do have all kinds of online searches.
Yeah, this is the whole cyber stalking thing. It's like you
Hmm.
cyber stalk your date to make sure that they're single and that they have the job they said and all that kind of stuff. That gets kind of creepy too. Again, if someone's been burned by a situation like that where they've been lied about it, I don't really blame them for doing that, especially if they're sensitized to things like that based on their past experience. I don't know. It's not my speed, but I can see why people would cyber stalk somebody before they date them, particularly if you're a woman.
We talked this, our podcast is called Shiny New Packages, Old Scams and Shiny New Packages. Do you know the story of Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves?
Yes, I do know. Yes.
Okay, the portrait
Yes.
that Henry thought she was really beautiful, and she was German too, which helped
Right.
because they wanted to, unite the dynastic families. And it turned out that when he finally met her after he had proposed marriage and agreed to marry her, she was not what the painting showed. The painting showed a very beautiful woman. She was not quite that.
Right.
And
Yes.
so if it can happen to Henry VIII, it can happen to anyone.
That's that's a great point. Now, in his defense, she was pretty far away. He only got one sample in terms of pictures. He maybe should have got more samples, or he maybe should have got a personal testimony from somebody from his ambassador who went there and actually met her. You know what I mean? So I guess that's a good point. You should take it easy on yourself if you get catfished or go on a date with somebody who's a lot older than what they had come appear, because if it can happen to Henry VIII, it can happen to us.
That's absolutely right. And as it turned out, actually, the real winner in this was Anne of Cleves, because although they weren't married long, she managed figuratively and literally to keep her head.
That's true.
The other beautiful brides, several of them lost theirs.
Right, right.
So she actually came out the winner. But again, you could picture Henry VIII looking at a dating site and seeing maybe a single picture and saying, wow, that's a girl for me. And she's German. It's
Yes.
even better.
She's exotic.
Hmm. So we're all in this together, even Even Henry VIII.
Yes, exactly. If it can happen to Henry VIII, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah. John, what's the bottom line, would you say, given all of the scams, the AI slop? It sounds like the bottom line in your opinion is online dating is full of vulnerabilities and threats and danger, but it's not totally bad. It's just one arrow in the quiver.
Yes.
Just got to be careful.
Yes. Be careful like anything else in life. Be careful if you meet somebody in person. Be careful if you get set up with a blind date by a friend. Just be careful. It's just one tool to potentially meet somebody. And you got to be careful about a lot of things in life, and this is just one more thing to be careful about.
Totally agree.
Yep. And with that, I will end it. And I will end this podcast by saying, don't be afraid, because modern scams are just old scams in shiny new packages. Thank you, Don. Farewell.
Talk to you later, John.